What is going on, everybody? It is Dylan with DFS, bringing you a brand new video. Today's video going over some cash plays for week 6. I apologize about the lack of content this week. I will be a full content from here on. I plan at least 5 videos a week. I'm going to try to do every day and a live stream on Sunday here on. So hopefully we can get that going and we don't have these breaks in between videos. So starting off with quarterbacks, Lamar Jackson, 7,800 is a cash play for me. As you guys can see, the key that I have, smash plays aren't in there for subscribers. That gets updated on Sunday. So if you guys are interested in it, click the link for our Discord. It's a very cheap subscription package where you get my spreadsheets for not only the main slates, but for the showdowns as well. So Lamar Jackson, a cash play against Washington, just being a very solid, consistent quarterback. Saw a ceiling game out of him last week against Cincinnati. We have another really good matchup for him. It's just a safe floor. Obviously, Washington's defense has played better, but I still think they are a bottom defense. They are just overperforming right now. And Lamar and Derrick Henry are a lethal combo. Jaden Daniels is tournament for me. I just think this is a very tough matchup. I get Baltimore's secondary has been pretty bad as far as giving up yards, but I don't think this is a game where we see, at least in the passing style, Jaden Daniels having a really good game. We could see him be mobile. I definitely could see that being a possibility. There's just some other plays I'd prefer at a cheaper price with a better matchup, in my opinion, than going Jaden Daniels in this one. Jalen Hurts, another tournament, 7,200 against Cleveland. Look, I like Jalen Hurts. I like the rushing upside, especially getting the rushing touchdowns. Should be getting both his weapons in A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith back this week. Cleveland's still playing running backs pretty well. So I'm leaning towards, the passing game being more successful. But this Cleveland defense at any time could be a very elite defense like they were. The offense just puts them in a really bad spot, and they're on the field quite a bit. I feel like to where we're not seeing the full potential of that defense. And if Philly can do what other teams have done against that offense, it can continue. Kyler at 6,800 against Green Bay. I believe this is a really good game script for Kyler, to where I think there's been holes in this Green Bay defense so far this season. Obviously, some injuries, unfortunately, on their side, especially in the secondary we've seen. Jair should be back as far as I could tell. If he's out, that's just another plus. But if Green Bay's offense is able to do successful things against Arizona's defense, I could definitely see Kyler Murray, especially way behind, having some success in the pass and on the run. So 6,800, I like it. But cash, Dak Prescott 6,700 against Detroit, where we saw him have a very good game. He threw over 300 yards, 2 touchdowns against Detroit last season. So definitely playable again for me. Detroit just plays running backs really well, besides Kenneth Walker apparently, but Rico Dowdle, Ezekiel Elliott aren't guys that are screaming as very talented running backs, at least this season, right? But for Dallas, you've seen not only CeeDee Lamb kind of find unsuccess lately. This is a game where we saw him receive over 200 yards. Jalen Tolbert had an amazing game last week. So he's emerging with Brandon Cooks being out and Jake Ferguson always being a threat. So I like Dak. I think he's very stackable on this slate. Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins, both those quarterbacks are definitely stackable. So, getting Goff with Williams, Amon-Ra, Kirk Cousins has an amazing matchup against Carolina, to where they have a lot of injuries offensively, defensively. It does concern me, though, how many injuries they have. I could definitely see Atlanta trying to get Bijan in the game a lot more. Obviously, Bijan has kind of had a lackluster season. It just is what it is. This is a very good bounce back game opportunity for him. And then last but not least, Spencer Rattler at 4,000 on DraftKings is definitely a cash play, right? We barely ever see this for quarterbacks. Last season, I had Aiden O'Connell in the line against the Chargers, I believe it was, to where he paid off. He got like 12 points, but it allowed you to pay up at other positions. And Spencer Rattler does it again. In my opinion, you don't need to I don't know why that's messed up. Sorry about that. You don't need to stack. Everything's messed up about that. You don't need to stack Spencer Rattler with anybody. You don't need to put him with Olave. You could play Kamara with Rattler. It's doable. You could put Shaheed in there, but I don't think you need to put anybody in there. It is basically Spencer Rattler gets 10 points. At the quarterback position, it's not the greatest, especially if some other quarterbacks are getting you 30 points. But if you can afford, some good running backs, which there are quite a bit this week, putting Spencer Rattler in there allows you to do some of that, especially at wide receiver. If you wanted to target both CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra, you're spending over $16,000 on those two receivers alone. You get Spencer Rattler in there, and it balances out, right? We talk about stacks. We talk about Dak is $6,700. CeeDee Lamb is $8,600, I believe. And then if you put Tolbert or Jake Ferguson in there, you're spending another, I think, $49,000 to $5,000. So we're literally talking the same price of having Spencer Rattler and Lamb and Amon-Ra almost for the same price. So it's very doable with him as quarterback. I apologize about that error. Now we go to running backs, right? Derrick Henry, tournament play, $8K against Washington. Derrick Henry's had some very solid games, right? We haven't seen the 30 DraftKings point games the last couple of weeks, but I mean, the overtime run was huge for him. Last week kind of saved him, but he's been very solid so far this season in a really good matchup to where I think they're going to get Derrick Henry and Justice Hill involved just a little more and have success at that. Alvin Kamara is a cash play for me at $7,700 against Tampa. I mentioned there's a lot of injuries for New Orleans. Obviously, Derek Carr, that's why we're talking about Rattler. Their offensive line is banged up. Taysom Hill out, so Alvin Kamara is probably going to get a lot of work, not just on the ground, but being able to get some receptions and receiving yards, which we've seen him, and having a quarterback in Spencer Rattler's kind of scenario. Alvin Kamara definitely is a guy you want to target if you can afford the $7,700. Obviously, there's some really good, solid wide receiver plays and some cheaper running back plays. So I already know Jonathan Taylor's out. Josh Jacobs is a tournament play at $6,700 for me against Arizona, to where Josh Jacobs, if this man gets a touchdown, he pays off. I honestly think he pays off. He's just not getting the touchdown love. Obviously last week he does, but the man has had some very high rushing yard games, and it's a very good opponent to target against in Arizona. And Josh Jacobs just screams a very good tournament play. But Bijan, you're getting him at a unlike Bijan price against a defense who Jadeveon Clowney's going to be out. I mentioned their offensive line is banged up. Secondary, I think, is just still poor for Carolina, so we could see some success with Atlanta getting some big plays and then turning to Bijan once they get towards the red zone. So I like him at that price. Obviously, Tyler Allgeier's there, and he's going to get carries, but I think this is a very good bounce back opportunity, especially at the price point for Bijan. Chuba Hubbard, $6,300, right? It sounds ugly. Breaks out for the big run against the Bears. Didn't find a lot of success after that. But the amount of work he gets, Jonathan Brooks is still not back yet. Chuba Hubbard's just going to be used a lot. So if you're looking for a high volume running back, he's the guy to go to. And he has a good matchup this week as well in a division opponent with Atlanta. J.K. Dobbins is a tournament play, and this one's kind of sneaky just because Denver has been a very good defense so far this year, especially if you look at all their numbers. Played running backs fairly well, but Gus Edwards is out. The Chargers kind of getting healthy again. In this division game, I like Dobbins kind of getting more usage in this at his price point of $6,200. And then Tony Pollard playing a bottom 5 defense in the league, just in allowing fantasy points. Moore is going to be back in for Indy's secondary. Anthony Richardson, which we've seen less success with him so far. So far, I think they can have success again. Michael Pittman probably missing, so maybe some issues with Indy's offense, but as far as Indy's defense, especially their defensive line with DeForest Buckner out, right? Tony Pollard's in a really good spot to where Tennessee has found success on the run game. They found success using Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears, right? Not just solely one of them, but both have had success. So like Tony Pollard in this one. Najee Harris is a tournament if Jalen Warren ends up missing. I think Najee does become a cash play at his price point against a Vegas team who their defense has just been very underperforming, especially their defensive line who's been banged up. And then speaking of that, Wilkins is going to be out. That's a huge blow. And maybe Pittsburgh finds some success on the run game. We already know Cordell's going to be out. So just watching for the Jalen Warren news. If he is out, Najee at 5,800 is playable. Bucky Irving, 5,400. We're assuming Rachaad White is out. So Bucky Irving at his price point, 5,400. We already, I've said it from the beginning. He was one of my rookie running backs I was targeting. I did not think Rachaad White was elite enough to where what we saw last season was just a lot of volume. It wasn't a lot of good volume, right? Like he wasn't doing Alvin Kamara numbers when getting these receptions and volume. He was just getting so much volume, especially in the receiving game, that it paid off. Bucky Irving's just looked very, very, very good on the ground. And then when he does get his targets, which isn't a whole lot, it just adds on to that. So now he should get the bulk of it. Sean Tucker, I believe, will be the backup, and Sean Tucker's looked decent this season as well. So if you want to do a super punt at running back, I imagine Sean Tucker's pretty cheap this week. Antonio Gibson, a value play. I don't think it goes to cash yet with Stevenson being out. Obviously, he's going to see a lot of work, but it is a tough matchup against Houston, in my opinion. James Cook had a good week. Antonio Gibson could see a few targets. You got to remember Drake May's the quarterback this Sunday, not Jacoby Brissett, so we could see an extra few targets to Gibson when that pressure comes there, just as a check down. Justice Hill, I mentioned with Derrick Henry. I just feel like Baltimore's running backs are going to have success this week. Justice Hill at 5,200. I'd rather him be at the 5K or 4,900 range, but I can understand why. He's had a couple really good weeks for fantasy, so it makes sense. And then Tajay Spears, I mentioned same thing with Tony Pollard. And we move on to wide receiver, and I mentioned CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra, very expensive on this slate, right? With a 10-game slate, you're not getting a whole bunch of names. Obviously, Nico Collins is on IR, so that's another big name. Devontae Adams, you're getting, two top 10 guys out, and some with some tough matchups. So CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra, both these guys are cash plays for me. It is very hard. I mentioned it's 16-7, and that's not counting your quarterback if you wanted to stack Goff or get Dak. But if you just wanted these two guys, you're paying a lot of money for just those two, and you're going to have to punt in a few spots, especially if you're paying, $6K plus for a quarterback this week. So I do love them both. Obviously, like I mentioned, CeeDee Lamb had a 200-yard game. Amon-Ra, I think, was about 21 points, somewhere around there, and that was in their game last season. A.J. Brown is a tournament play for me. I definitely want to get exposure to A.J. Brown. We haven't really seen him. Cleveland's secondary has been underperforming quite a bit compared to what we're used to. His numbers are just always amazing. But it is a tough matchup. He is priced still kind of high for being injured, and I just don't love it at that price point to put it to cash. Diggs, I think, is stackable if you want to target Houston's offense. Obviously, with Nico Collins being out, Stephon Diggs he shouldn't see Gonzalez much, which is the biggest concern when targeting against New England's defense, is who's going to see Gonzalez. Stephon Diggs lines up in the slot quite a bit. Tank Dell and Hutchinson, Mechie, I imagine, are going to mix those two guys with Gonzalez. So Jaden Reed, a tournament play. He's just getting up there in price. I imagine we get Dobbs and Watson back in this one. All good matchups, right? I don't dislike any Green Bay pass catcher matchups. It's just you're starting to get more health. And we've seen it in the past where Jaden Reed still has good games, but you're paying $7K now for him. Yet again, still great matchup. I just don't know if I want to get there in cash when someone like Chris Godwin is $100 cheaper on this slate against New Orleans, to where we're going to see Mike Evans and Marshawn Lattimore. Again, we've known the history between these two to where it's a very tough matchup. Adebo is a top 5 corner when it comes to allowing his opposing receiver to get yards. So if you're getting a slot receiver playing against New Orleans, there's a good chance they're going to get a lot of yards. Even though last week we didn't see Chris Godwin have an amazing game, he still had a good game nonetheless. You get Drake London at 6,700 against Carolina. Definitely want to get exposure to Atlanta pass catchers against Carolina. It's not that it's a bad play. It's just the inconsistency with how Atlanta's pass catchers have been. Obviously, a really good week last week against Tampa, but at his price point, yeah, it's starting to get up there. Olave mentioned, we saw Rattler say that he's going to get Olave the ball, so I obviously have to get him in my player pool at 6,600. Shaheed's numbers have just looked better in Tampa's corners. Believe it or not, Tampa's corners can play some pretty good pass defense. Zay Flowers, right, getting exposure in this game and elsewhere, right? I mentioned how good the run game is, but Washington's secondary is bad. They are bad. We've seen some teams underperform against their defense, but they are bad. Zay Flowers is in a really good spot at 6,500 against his team, to where I'm definitely going to get him in tournaments. Terry McLaurin on the other side is stackable if you want to go with Jaden Daniels. His price is starting to get up there, though. 6,400. We're used to him being in the mid or higher 5K. Now he's 6,400. So do that as you will. I mentioned Tank Dell with Nico Collins being out. We saw Tank Dell have some really, really good wide receiver 1 weeks last season. Obviously, it's a tougher matchup, but if anything tells us Stroud and Dell are going to find a way to have a good chemistry, have a good connect in this game. So I definitely want to get some exposure. It's not the greatest matchup, obviously, but those two are a menace together. George Pickens has a really good matchup against Vegas here. I mentioned Wilkins out. Crosby is going to play, I do believe, but has been banged up. Aiden O'Connell going to be the quarterback, so I kind of like Pickens no matter who his quarterback ends up being for the entire game. I like Pickens. I think he's in a really good spot here against Vegas. Jameson Williams, right, had a, for where he was with the team when they played Dallas, he had a good game, right? Compared to what we've seen so far this season, not so much. He's getting up there in price as well, 5,800, but he's definitely had some really, really big games for Detroit. This might be another one, very stackable, right? If you wanted to get away from Amon-Ra and still get exposure, Jameson Williams is there. Obviously, Gibbs is there as well, but it's touchy with Gibbs. Shaheed, I mentioned, if Spencer Rattler didn't say anything about Olave just getting him the ball, I think it'd be very easy to say Shaheed's got the advantage in this one, just being the deep ball threat. Unfortunately, that's how he's mostly used as a deep ball threat, though. But when he connects, it definitely pays off. Jacoby Myers, kind of like it as a sneaky one, right? We've seen Pittsburgh's secondary kind of get beat lately with Devontae Adams being out. I like Jacoby Myers, especially at his price point at 5,400. Darnell Mooney, right, a good stackable option at 5,300. Obviously, his price is going up after what he's done so far this season. DeAndre Hopkins against Indy, I don't love it, right, has definitely not found a connection with Will Levis this season, but I think if there's any game for it to happen, it's this one. He's priced kind of high for what he's produced so far this season, but I do think this is a game where DeAndre Hopkins, maybe even Calvin Ridley, I just think Calvin Ridley's still really expensive for production so far this season, but it is a good matchup for DeAndre Hopkins. Jalen Tolbert stackable at 5,000 if you wanted to get away from, let's say you wanted to pivot off Jake Ferguson for some reason. Jalen Tolbert, $5,100 more expensive. Land McConkey, good matchup against Denver, right? He's not going to see a whole lot of Pat Surtain, so him and Justin Herbert have had a pretty good connection. His numbers are really good. So definitely not a cash play, but someone I want to have exposure to because of their price point. I mentioned Green Bay pass catchers. Christian Watson's always one that stands out to me as a guy that can have a ceiling and with low ownership kind of stands out. So like that one there. Michael Wilson against Green Bay, just his matchup he's going to see. I like it, especially at the price point. And then Rashard Bateman at 4,100 going against Washington. I mentioned how much I like Zay Flowers. I mentioned that Baltimore, I think Baltimore's going to use the running backs good. a good amount, but I still think they're going to pass the ball, obviously. And for Bateman's price in the matchup he's got, I definitely want some exposure there as well. And then just a sneaky one, right? Jonathan Mingo, I'm just going to mention it against Atlanta, just having a really good matchup against a corner that's given up a lot of yards to slot receivers. So I'm just going to mention that one there. Tight end, we're still waiting, right, on news for other positions, for other players, before we start really getting a deep dive into what tight ends we want to target, because the tight end play honestly has been underperformed by almost every team. Brock Bowers has been one of the more consistent tight ends this season, has a good matchup against Pittsburgh, but you are paying a $6K price tag for him. Trey McBride, good matchup against Green Bay. Apologize about that. Good matchup against Green Bay at 5,700, but it's not, I don't need him, but I want exposure to him, especially his price point up at 5,700. With other good plays, I think more people are going to be off McBride. Jake Ferguson, 5K against Detroit. Is the same price. I don't know why I thought they were different. I think I was thinking of Tucker Kraft, but Jake Ferguson, 5K, Tolbert, 5K, so you could flip a coin and pick either one. Price point of Jake Ferguson at 5K for a tight end versus a receiver is kind of worrisome. Usually you want to pivot, or you want a guy that's going to be in a smash spot. So if you wanted to go Tolbert, I wouldn't have a problem with it, with how Detroit's secondary has been. Tucker Kraft, with Dobbs and Watson being in this game, it does concern me, and his price skyrocketed to 4,800. Kyle Pitts, 4,400 against Carolina. It's just a good matchup for him, and he's an Atlanta pass catcher, so definitely want exposure to it. Pat Freiermuth, I mentioned how much I like George Pickens against Vegas's defense. Pat Freiermuth has a really good matchup at his price point too of 4,300. Regardless of who the quarterback is, I think it's pretty good. And then Hunter Henry, as of right now, is probably like the cheapest guy I have at 3,800 against Houston. It's not the greatest matchup, but his target share, his first down targets, I'm willing to take a risk with Drake May being the quarterback that we might see some extra targets go Hunter Henry's way. So hope you guys did enjoy the video. Like I mentioned, if you guys are interested in getting the full spreadsheets whenever you guys want, I usually have it done by Saturday. And then the smash plays are put in on Sunday. If you guys are interested in this, any of my bets and props, any fantasy or DFS questions, you guys can click the link. Very cheap subscription package. So hope you guys enjoy, and I'll see you in the next one.